This is a Hope 1032 podcast.
Hello and welcome to a bonus episode of Troubleshooting. Basically, as you may or may not be aware, the federal government here in Australia has rolled out some new laws effectively banning under 16-year-olds from a number of applications, websites and platforms that are all deemed as social media. As a non-under 16-year-old myself, and with very few acquaintances that are actually directly impacted by these laws, I figured in order to get a better understanding on what's actually happening, I would turn to somebody who was far more knowledgeable than myself in this space. Enter Collett Smart. She's a psychologist, she's an internationally renowned author, she's a public speaker, as well as host of the Raising Teens with Collett Smart podcast, another excellent Hope Media production. Collett, welcome. Please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you so much for having me on the podcast. Well, my journey was an interesting one to get to where I am. Obviously, my accent is South African, but I have lived in Australia for more than 20 years now. I have 3 children, so 2 young adults and 1 child still left in high school doing currently now their final year of high school across this year and next year. Although I'm a psychologist and I'm an author, I wrote a parenting book called They'll Be Okay a few years ago, and I am the host of the Raising Teens podcast. I also practice in schools. I consult to schools, run seminars, parenting seminars for schools. I also spend some time lecturing at university. I lecture undergrad psychology and social sciences units. But my early years, I actually first studied teaching. So I began as a primary teacher and then moved into psychology, but began primary for a short bit, then actually spent more time in high school. Really loved working with late primary, high school students. And during that period, I was studying psychology because I'd actually fallen in love with the psychology subject when I was studying education and thought, oh my goodness, I really like this. I want to go a little bit further. So ended up studying further and qualifying, but moved to Australia 20 plus years ago and had to register as a psychologist. I had to do a 2-year internship, and I also had to register as a teacher, but I only had a 3-week intensive program that I had to do and do a kind of a teaching prac at a school, even though I'd been teaching for a few years by then. I do appreciate Australia's high quality and standards that they expect of professionals. I've spent most of my time in Australia in schools, working in schools as a school psychologist, and then also across private practice, and then as a university teacher, tutor, lecturer. I really enjoy research, and so I spent quite a bit of time doing curriculum development for some subjects, developing curricula from scratch. And I also did another postgrad 2 years ago where I went into a Master of Child and Adolescent Mental Health just to get a little bit more of a focus on currently what is going on with our children and young people.
Okay, so you started off wanting to be a teacher and ended up becoming more interested in what's actually going on in our kids' heads as they're growing up. So it sounds like you're the perfect person then to be talking to about social media, what's going on with our kids. So tell me, what are your thoughts on the social media landscape as it stands in these kind of early days, post-legislation, but pre-kind of it having any real effect yet?
I can't help but think about 15 years ago when I was working in schools as a school psychologist. I often tell the story at my parenting seminars. There was a lady who sat at the front office of the school that I was working at. She really was the person who held everything together. She was quite incredible. Her name was Linda. And she had to collect every phone from every child around the time, I can't remember exactly when, but around the time when phones began to be a thing in schools, where kids used to be getting new phones or inheriting parents' old phones or whatever it was. But the thing is that the entirety of the middle school of children who had phones, So the high school or senior school ages, so that was around years 9 and up, didn't have to hand in their phones if they had one. The middle school age was anything between around year 5-ish, grade 5 to grade 8, beginning of grade 8. The entirety of all of the phones in that age group could fit into the top drawer next to Linda. And it was a little single drawer. Every single phone that every child owned in that middle school could fit into that top drawer. The same school now has been taking schools in. I no longer work at that school, but the same school now, they still take in phones for junior, primary, and middle school ages. And each class now has an entire Tupperware container that gets put onto a trolley, and the trolleys get pushed into a back storage room, and they've got these trolleys of phones for young people. So for me, it's almost like I can't answer that question without thinking back to how much has changed in such a short period of time. And I remember a time when my eldest, who's now 25, he was probably late high school at the time, and he had started high and primary school really without a phone. Even then, I look at all three of my children are Generation Z, so my youngest is the tail end of Gen Z. And I find it fascinating because my eldest son said to me once, he said, "Mum, my little brother will never ever remember a time when he had to wait for the adverts during play school or the Wiggles and run as fast as he could to go to the toilet or grab an extra bowl of breakfast or whatever it was on a Saturday morning. He can already just push pause on his show. And that just is crazy, Mum, how that's kind of happened since I was little. So it kind of blows me away that in one generation in Gen Z, there's been this enormous shift, even in my own family, of the way phones are used, technology is used, and social media has been used. So that brings me to really my thoughts on the social media landscape. And I see teenagers and young people all the time. Parents talk to me all the time. And in my opinion, I know it's really divided, but I would say I am of the opinion that leans more towards that it's a positive thing. Now, is it perfect? Is it foolproof, bulletproof? Absolutely not. But is it something that I see as positive? I do. I have been a big proponent of delaying children using social media for quite a long time, even to the extent that I was quite outspoken when young people were getting social media at 13, because 13 was the age limit, and young people were still being allowed or still getting around the rules then and had social media, TikTok when it came out, Snapchat when it came out, when they were 10, 9, that kind of thing. So do I think all children under 16 are now not ever going to access social media? No, I don't, because I don't think all children under 13 stopped accessing social media or didn't access social media because they weren't 13. But I do believe that the more we allow children time to develop and grow, just the better it is for their long-term well-being. We do know that our young people are struggling with their mental health. There's lots of concerns with young people. Do I think it's only social media that has led to this? No, I don't. Of course, it's not simply social media. But I do believe social media really has, and a lot of technology use, puts children who are already at risk, just more at risk for some of the things that they can see, some of the things that they can access, and just not doing other things. We always talk about the displacement effect. So essentially, the more children and adults spend time online, we are displacing other really important aspects of our lives. So we are not exercising, we are not eating mindfully or well, we are not socializing face to face, which is very important to learn social skills and to enjoy people's company and move our bodies and all those things that we can do when we're not on technology. we actually lose the opportunities for those the more time we spend with technology. And that's adults as well. Do I think young people can have social communities and groups online? Of course they can. Absolutely. And that is one of the concerns that have come up. But I think I would have to go with what the eSafety Commissioner talks about. We are not just banning social media. We are actually encouraging a delay so that children can grow and develop and their brains can catch up and they can do all the things that they're meant to do with their bodies and their minds that previous generations have been able to do. Again, it's not rosy, that previous generations were perfect and wonderful and we're all, this wonderful picture of health. I'm not saying that, but we can't change biology. And there certainly is research by Jean Twenge and Jonathan Haidt's research that talks about the negative effects of too much technology and particularly social media. Social media, especially with girls, we've seen a real impact negatively on their mental health.
So it sounds like you and I are actually fairly aligned. Technology can be amazing when it's used appropriately. But our current, well, not even just our young people, currently a lot of us, myself included, are really feeling the negative effects of an always online life when technology stops being the tool that you're using and starts to take over your life. So I guess my next question is, what is it the government's actually hoping to change about the way technology is starting to rule our lives and particularly our young people's lives?
So for a while, things were not really well known. I think a lot of us parents and people who work in schools and working with young people's mental health, we still aren't completely certain. There are still a lot of unknowns, but some of the platforms that we do know, and that is listed on the eSafety Commissioner's website, the ones we know that have been banned or there's a delay now and they're age restricted: Facebook, Instagram, Kik, Reddit, Snapchat, Threads, TikTok, Twitch, and X, which was formerly Twitter, and YouTube. There was uncertainty about whether Discord or Roblox and Steam and YouTube Kids would have an age restricted or an age limit. It seems like from the eSafety Commissioner's website that those are not. And, people would say, experts would say, there are certainly harms that could come with Discord. I've been speaking out about Roblox for a long time. There's a lot of inappropriate content on Roblox, and we have very little children on Roblox. So in some ways, I'm a bit surprised that one hasn't ended up with an age restriction. But of course, children can be bullied. They can send inappropriate messages on Discord, on Messenger, on WhatsApp. But it's more some of these other websites that are part of the age restriction, like Instagram and YouTube, where you can really follow influencers or go down rabbit holes of inappropriate content, which children stumble on. And as we know with the algorithms, the more you click on something, the more those will be pushed to you into your feed. And one of the biggest issues that the eSafety Commissioner has had is that these platforms have not really done much at all to try and protect children or safeguard children from having access to any of this content.
So you've listed some of the platforms that were directly targeted by this legislation. And listeners, if you didn't quite catch that list or you're not quite sure what those things even are, there is a bunch of info on esafety.gov.au explaining what those websites and apps are for those who may not be aware, and then which platforms are currently being targeted by the legislation. And if you're not sure what your young people are using, then it's probably time to have a chat with them if you haven't already. So as of now, under 16-year-olds shouldn't have access to those platforms specifically, and no doubt there will be more that come out in time. A couple of weeks ago, the minimum age on, let's say, Facebook or Instagram was 13. So now there are probably plenty of people who sit in this category of 13 to 16 years old who have an account, have probably had some interaction with these platforms for quite some time. What's going to happen to those accounts? What happens if they can still use their account moving forward, even though they should be banned?
One of the common questions asked is usually, will a child under 16 get into trouble with the law if they have an account on an age-restricted platform after the 10th of December? I think we need to remind our children, and it's important for us to remember as parents and teachers and carers, that it's none of this law is about punishing children or getting them in trouble with the police or whoever it might be that they're afraid they're going to get in trouble with if they still have a social media account and it hasn't been shut down, or they haven't shut down their own account, or however they have an account. The onus really is on the platforms who have not, for as long as ever, taken no steps to protect our children, to check the algorithms, to ensure that children under 13, when it was an age restriction of 13, they took no steps to check that children weren't accessing social media platforms, and never mind inappropriate content that was on those platforms. So the social media giants, they are the ones who will face a penalty of up to 49.5 million if they don't take steps to prevent underage accounts. Essentially, again, this whole new law is not about punishing children. It is about giving parents another tool for helping their children to delay and have a childhood in that sense for longer.
Well, that's good. So we're not punishing kids for being kids, but we're putting the responsibility back on the platforms to actually protect our children. And hopefully we'll actually be punishing them for when they don't do their job correctly. Now, I admit I'm a user on a number of the platforms that are affected by this, and when people have asked me what my plan was, I made it very clear that the second Discord or Reddit or Facebook needs to see a copy of my driver's license, I'm deactivating my account. There have just been too many instances where platforms haven't secured the data as well as they should have done, and I quite frankly just don't trust them anymore. But on the 10th of December, when this law came into effect, nothing happened. I didn't have to confirm my age. I didn't have Robocop knock on my door and scan my irises to prove who I was and whether I'm old enough to use the internet. So how do they actually know that I'm over 16? Why haven't I had to do anything to prove who I am?
I think the idea of checking if someone is under 16 has been possibly one of the bigger concerns or worries by parents, and I think adults themselves. I just saw on social media, ironically, yesterday, that an adult has been logged out of their Instagram account, but not their Facebook account, and they are over 16, but their Facebook account is fine, yet their Instagram account has been completely shut down. It seems, though, this to me feels like one of the murky areas where I don't think government bodies are sure exactly how this is going to work and be safe. But really, again, this seems like the technology giants, social media giants, they are the ones who the onus is on them to ensure they've given people a few options to prove their age. The concern, though, is the risk of scammers who will try to get people to upload government documents, passports, licenses, whatever it might be, to do age checks. The eSafety Commissioner said that they will continue updating their eSafety guide with relevant links for where to go that are safe links to upload documents if need be for the platforms to check and verify your age. I'll be honest, that makes me uncomfortable. My husband works in IT and I find that really quite an uncomfortable, if not scary thought of putting your documents online. But that is something that I think is going to have to be ironed out or looked at. They can't, allegedly, the platforms can't just rely on a birth date. But it also appears that the platforms have enough data on children and adults, the things we scroll through, the things we stop to look at the accounts we follow, even the language that we use, all of that kind of behavior that we have online very quickly can tell the algorithms, the AI. I'm not a technology expert, so I cannot give you the technological language around this, but they clearly have the technology to be able to scrape through your data and your habits and tell more or less what your age is just by what you do and who you follow. And so it's more likely, one of the things they've said is if the only time you ever seem to log on is after 3, mostly in the afternoon after school, or, you're following various music groups or use certain language when you are interacting with your friends via direct messages, the age of the majority of your friends, they will be able to have an idea even with that for your age. So it doesn't seem to be simple. I don't have a simple answer. So some of these things are still, we've got to wait and see.
Yeah, great. So they don't have to ask me for my ID or for me to prove who I am because they already know enough about me to be able to just know who I am based off of the data they've collected. I don't know if that's less scary or more scary. But anyway, let's focus on the positives then. What positive effects do you foresee with the current way the legislation is worded and being rolled out now?
Some of the positive effects really is around this whole idea of delay and giving children time to be children. Not in an idealized way. Of course, it comes across as being idealistic and, that there's going to be this magical new summer coming up that was a summer that we as parents had in the 80s, 70s, whatever time you grew up in. Long bicycle rides and staying out till it was dark. I think some of those things as parents we've become fearful of. I think for quite a while there's been this build-up with us parents, and I'm speaking for myself, where we have become a bit afraid for our children because we as adults are so exposed to the media. So we're afraid to let our children out and be independent because there could be stabbings, muggings, kidnappings, and so on. Despite, if you look at some of Jonathan Haidt's research, despite in the West, and I would say in places like Australia, we are actually a lot safer than we've ever been. And yet we are a lot more fearful than we've ever been as parents. And I think sometimes the pull is as parents when your child is sitting on the lounge or in their room on technology, you kind of know where they are, so you get this sense that they're kind of safe. But in many ways, their mental health hasn't been protected by them not being out socializing, having healthy risk-taking. And healthy risk-taking is doing things like climbing and getting on a train for the first time and catching a bus somewhere for the first time on their own, or trying a new skill or a new sport, or having a conversation with a strange, and I don't mean stranger as in strange random adults in a basement, because that's the type of person they could possibly be talking to online anyway. When I say stranger, I mean, are young people going to a youth group or going to a new sporting club and having to introduce themselves to peers for the first time? That's scary. And that's a skill that has to be learned. And it comes sometimes through trial and error and learning how to do those things. And if we don't do those things, if we don't practice, we don't become familiar with doing those things.
I absolutely feel that. So I'm on the borderline of millennial or Gen Z. So I see a lot of, kids these days or back in my day rhetoric that's idealizing the youth of yesteryear. But now, as I'm getting older and as the younger Gen Zs and, soon Gen Alpha are entering the workplace, I see so many kids that I was kind of forced to do and skills that I was forced to develop. And then I'm starting to feel like old man yelling at cloud, where these younger kids are coming in and they've never developed those skills because they've just never needed them until suddenly they do. But a lot of people are learning those skills online because there's no other option for them in the real world, so to speak, to actually develop those skills for whatever reason. So are we potentially causing issues for those young people and we're reducing their ability to communicate with their peers online in order to force them into the so-called real world that may or may not actually work for them or allow them to develop those skills.
Some of the negative effects that a lot of the experts are talking about are really our concerns about young people in regional areas who might have joined groups online, Facebook groups, or probably more for this generation would be Instagram or getting onto YouTube where they can find some of their interests, learn how to do something for the first time, learn a skill because there's someone showing it on Instagram or YouTube, whether it's cooking or building something or making something that is very often shown on YouTube or Instagram. Some of our young people as well who really are remote and don't have communities or friends their age to talk to, they've found communities where they can chat. We talk about our young people having community and how important it is for them to get out and interact with other people. But what about those who can't because they really live far away, they might have a disability, or they are struggling with certain things and that some of their confidence comes out online? And so that's where we would be, particularly our children struggling with their anxieties, social anxiety or whatever it might be, we would be putting things in place to help them with that, to develop skills for socialization. But we can't do that for some of our young people who are remote and don't have access to just socializing and going out to the local youth group because the local town is, 20, 40 kilometers away or more from where their home is. That has been a bit of a concern. One of the criticisms around this is that although there has been this delay of social media and these age restrictions, and some people do say that negatively, that it's a political issue and it's a voting issue in a sense, that may be. But I do agree with the fact that perhaps nothing has been done in terms of what do we put in place for our young people. So there will be lots of parents who will be on the ball and they will think about, this is now being taken out of my child's life. What healthy activities, hobbies can they do that we can put in place so that they're not just really struggling and have nothing to do, which isn't healthy anyway. And some of the questions around government funding has been in some of the areas, remote areas or communities, are you bringing things in place where children can learn skills or socialize or play sport? What are children going to do when this is taken away? So that has been a little bit of a concern. But I suppose I really just want to also kind of end off with saying, I actually think it was the Prime Minister who said, he was answering a journalist who said, well, what do you say today when there's now been this age restriction? Do you think that there's no young people out there under 16 today accessing social media? Do you think they all just magically are going off it now and it's done and they won't sneak around and get around it? And he said, well, as we sit here today, there are probably people under 18 who are sitting in pubs or drinking alcohol that shouldn't be there. But it doesn't mean we don't put some of the boundaries in place to try and support parents and families. And I think overwhelmingly what I have found in my parent seminars is that parents have said they do believe that this will be supportive for them. Because rather than parents feeling like they're the only one, because children always say, well, I'm the only one without social media. Now you can say, well, it's now part of the law and it just supports parents. It gives them another tool to help their children delay. And it becomes more of the norm that children and families will tend not to have social media rather than those that do. And I do think the next year or two is going to be the difficult period because we've had some children or young people who have had social media. They might be 14 or 15 and suddenly they've lost access overnight. My heart goes out to them because that is difficult because they were perhaps waiting until they turned 13 because that was the age limit. And then they were 13 and then they could get certain social media. And now suddenly it's gone. That is really difficult for some of our children. I think it's going to be the younger children who, just as they grow and it becomes going into high school, that not everybody just has social media because they're in high school, whether they're 13 or not. It becomes more of the norm. That makes it easier for children with the peer pressure, but also for parents when they say it's not a no, it's just a not yet. And so if parents are wondering how to talk to their children about the social media restrictions, there's some great stuff on the eSafety Commissioner's website on looking at what the limits are, which platforms are limited, how to have conversations and not to just have a one-off conversation. What do we do after those conversations? What if our children sneak around and create a social media page or handle or whatever it might be, and they shouldn't have? There's guidelines on that. But it's really about just being gentle with our children, particularly the ones who have just lost it. Ask open-ended questions, really listen carefully to what they're worried about, what they feel that they're going to lose and what they've lost. Ask them for ideas of what they think could be helpful to replace that in their lives. As adults, we can't just impose what we think they should be doing now that they don't have social media. Some of them might just gravitate more towards gaming or more towards sitting on WhatsApp. So it's not that they won't spend more time on their screens. And so that is something we need to still be mindful of. What are our children replacing their time with? More screens? Or how do we balance having screens but having them do things and be involved in things that they want to do and enjoy being part of? Really looking at having social media and technology contracts when you first start giving over phones or any devices. There's some great guests on my own podcast who've spoken about that, looking out for gaming addictions. There's some brilliant guests on my podcast who also look at the signs, help you look at the signs for that, but also how to set up a healthy home life that your children don't end up down that path. And then I have to obviously end with saying it's about modeling to our children. I've given my children permission to call me out when I'm on my devices too much. Do I use my device too much? Yes, regularly. Am I trying to check my habits? Yes, regularly. It's something that we struggle with as adults. So it's not just the kids in that sense. Perhaps we need to be looking at, do we have social media breaks? And when we're on holiday and our kids can't have social media, what are we doing? Are we just sitting on the couch on holiday on our phones all day? That doesn't seem fair to our kids. It will be very difficult for them if we are not showing them what a life without constantly being on your device looks like. So I think this is an ongoing conversation. As I said, I don't think any of this is perfect. There's still unknowns to this. Get onto the eSafety Commissioner's website if you're unsure. There's a lot of excellent tips and tools there. And let's see where this goes. I do believe this is a positive step, a step in the right direction. And it's really about trying to care for and look after our children. And this is one more tool that just helps us think of ways that we can. But really, we need to be talking to our young people and seeing how they're going during this time.
Collett, thank you so much for your time. You've certainly given me a lot to think about, and I hope you've given our listeners a lot to think about as well.
Thank you so much for having me. Great to be on the podcast.
That was Collett Smart, psychologist, author, and speaker. If you would like to learn more about her, check out her other work either at collettsmart.com or her own podcast, Raising Teens with Collett Smart, which is available on the Hope podcast page at hope1032.com.au or wherever good podcasts are listened to. Thank you so much for your time. I hope you enjoyed this bonus episode. I'm sure there will be more to come in the new year. Merry Christmas, stay safe, and be good to each other. We all need it right now. Have a good one.
Hope 1032. Thanks for listening.